Hello everyone, my name is Evelyn Pantoja, and in this video I'll be discussing the 10 major concepts, theories, and models that have shaped my learning in this course. I will explain what each idea means, how I personally connected with it, and how I plan to apply it in my future classroom. The theory I first introduced in my paper was Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. According to Morrison, Woyka, and Breffney in the textbook Early Childhood Education Today, Vygotsky believed that children's cognitive, linguistic, and social development is supported by and enhanced through social interaction. His theory emphasizes that learning is not something children do by themselves. Rather, it is shaped by the people, cultures, and environments around them. He also highlights learning through conversations, shared activities, modeling, and cultural tools. One of Vygotsky's most important ideas is the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development describes the space between what a child can do independently and what they can do with guidance. Another key idea is scaffolding, where adults provide support that gradually fades as the child becomes more capable. So this theory deeply resonated with me because my own language development was shaped by two very distinct environments, one of them being my Spanish-speaking home and the other my English-dominant school. So at home, my siblings and I would obviously speak Spanish. My parents don't understand English at all, and they don't know how to speak it either. So it was the only form of communication between us and our parents. Those interactions helped strengthen my Spanish fluency and cultural identity. But at school, I experienced or noticed a strong prioritization of the English language. Teachers often corrected me or ignored me when I spoke Spanish. Looking back at it now, I can see how those interactions shaped my relationship with both languages. I kind of, at some point, internalized that idea that English was the correct language and that Spanish was not appropriate or something that I needed to hide. Vygotsky helped me understand that my development wasn't just about ability, but also about the social messages I received. In my classroom, I want to create the kind of environment that wasn't available to me. I will encourage students to use their home language during discussions and activities. This will allow for a more natural form of speaking. I will also strategically pair students up so that they can work with one another and learn from each other. This is in hopes of building a classroom culture where every language and cultural background is valued. The next concept I introduced was translanguaging. As Escamilla, Alanis, and Mir explained in their article, Translanguaging and Learning Stories in Preschool, translanguaging is the practice of allowing bilingual children to use all of their linguistic resources to communicate, learn, and make meaning. Instead of treating languages as separate, isolated systems, translanguaging recognizes that bilinguals draw from one unified semiotic repertoire that children naturally use to express themselves. This means that bilingual children don't switch between languages in the way that schools often imagine. Instead, they fluidly draw from their entire linguistic background to think, reason, and communicate. This concept felt personal because translanguaging is how I naturally communicate. With my siblings and friends, I tend to switch between English and Spanish constantly. Sometimes I can find a certain word in one of the languages, so I use the other language to fill in. Translanguaging just lets me express myself fully and authentically. Growing up, I didn't really have teachers who understood this, so mixing languages in schools was seen as incorrect or unprofessional. But translanguaging research shows the opposite. It is a strength and not a weakness. For bilingual students or bilingual children, translanguaging supports comprehension, strengthens identity, builds confidence, encourages deeper thinking, and it allows them to access prior knowledge and helps them express complex ideas. When we force children to separate their languages, we interrupt their thinking. We ask them to translate instead of understand. This unintentionally sends the message that part of who they are is not welcome in the classroom. In my classroom, translanguaging will not be an exception. It will be the norm. I plan to integrate it intentionally in several ways, but mainly through writing. Translanguaging in writing consists of having students, or basically allowing students to draft, brainstorm, and annotate in whichever language helps them think. If a child writes a sentence in Spanish and another in English, that's not a mistake. That's authentic bilingual expression, which is what I'm trying to encourage in my classroom. Next is deficit thinking. As discussed in Dr. Reeder's presentation, Language Development, Linguistic Input, and Linguistic Racism, deficit thinking is the belief that children from marginalized backgrounds are less capable because of their home environment. This belief shifts the blame onto students for systemic inequities and lowers student expectations. In all honesty, we can all be quick to make assumptions. However, we have to recognize how those assumptions can be harmful to our students. A very harmful assumption of Spanish-speaking families is that parents choose to not be involved in their child's learning, but that is often not the case. Usually, parents care very deeply about their child's education. They just don't have the language tools or school knowledge to navigate the system. As a future educator, I understand how assumptions can be damaging to my students. They can change the way I interact with them, the way that I interpret their language use, and the way I view their potential. Recognizing this has pushed me to reflect on my own biases and commit to doing better for my students. How this will look in my classroom is that I will facilitate communication between me and my students' families. I think a very big part of breaking this barrier is by reaching out to families, by putting in the effort. Some parents often are scared because they don't speak a certain language, they don't understand the school system. And as teachers, we should provide the support not only to our students but to our parents, because they play a very important role in their child's development and their child's learning. The more involved they are, the better for our students. The Montessori method. The Sprouts video titled Montessori School Education summarizes Maria Montessori's teaching philosophy. This child-centered educational approach is built on the belief that children are naturally curious, capable, and driven to learn when placed in the right environment. Montessori emphasized independence, exploration, hands-on exploration, and freedom within structure. She believed that children learned best when they were able to move, choose, and interact with materials that are intentionally designed to support their development. This philosophy challenges traditional schooling, which relies heavily on whole group instruction, teacher lessons, and rote learning. Montessori flips that model by trusting children to take ownership of their own learning. This method stood out to me because it allowed me to reflect on my own educational experiences. In my essay, I talk about my experience with two different professors who had a very different understanding who had very different interpretations of what independent learning looked like. From my own experiences, I developed a clear understanding of the importance of finding the perfect balance between giving students freedom and providing enough instructional support. How I will apply this method in my classroom is by creating a prepared environment where students can access materials independently. This would include having clearly labeled shelves, hands-on manipulatives, learning centers, and just organized spaces. Montessori's method challenged my understanding of what it means to teach. It reminded me that teaching is not about controlling every moment, but rather creating authentic and meaningful learning opportunities for our students. The model classroom. According to the article Early Childhood Model Classroom from Education Service Center Region 13, a model classroom is intentionally designed to support engagement, collaboration, and independence. Learning centers play a really big role in the model classroom as they provide hands-on opportunities for exploration. This concept aligns with many of the theories we've studied thus far, such as the Montessori method with the prepared environment, the Reggio Emilia's environment as the third teacher, and Vygotsky's emphasis on social interaction. The model brings all these ideas together in a way that it is practical, accessible, and developmentally appropriate for early childhood settings. When I think back to my own classrooms as a child, I realized that many of them lacked intentional design. We had a whiteboard, we had our desk, and maybe a reading corner, but not much else was going on. One thing that stood out to me was the absence of these intentionally designated spaces such as learning centers and peace centers. As a child, I often felt overwhelmed and anxious, especially when I was struggling with certain subjects. And I didn't have a space where I could regulate my emotions or just take a moment to breathe. So instead, I had to push through these feelings, which often made learning harder. Reading the Model Classroom article helped me understand how powerful environment can be in supporting emotional regulation. Teachers must recognize that a peace center isn't something extra, but rather it is a tool that teachers can use to help children manage their emotions. If I had access to a space like that growing up, I know it would have made a difference in my ability to focus. This reflection helped me see how the model classroom connects to my values as a teacher and what I will be implementing in my future classroom. I do plan on creating learning spaces where students get to engage in in independent exploration. And those peace centers are really important to me because I want students to have a safe space where, they can go to if they're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or just need a moment for themselves. I believe that through this, I can help in creating that welcoming and supportive environment that I'm striving for. Sensory-based learning. As explained in Dr. Reeder's presentation, Integrating Arts, Mathematics, and Literacy in Early Childhood Education, sensory-based learning is an instructional approach that engages children's senses. This would include sight, touch, sound, smell, to help them understand concepts more deeply. This approach is grounded in two major theories, the Montessori sensory learning theory, which emphasizes the importance of hands-on materials, and Piagate's constructivism, which explains how children build knowledge through active exploration. Sensory learning is especially powerful in early childhood because young children learn through doing. They need to touch, manipulate, build, and just move in order to make sense of abstract ideas. When children engage their senses, they stay engaged longer and they develop both cognitive and motor skills. Some of my most memorable learning experiences growing up were sensory based. I still remember using the small counting bears in math class. Instead of just reading a problem on a worksheet, I could physically move the bears and see the math happening in front of me. Those experiences made learning feel real and understandable. In Dr. Reeder's presentation, she discussed the sculpting and counting activity where children use Play-Doh to create shapes and then they count them. This activity stood out to me because it reminded me of how much I benefited from hands-on learning. It also showed me how sensory activities support multiple areas of development at once. In my classroom, I plan to integrate sensory-based learning. I plan to use the same, the same counting and sorting activities that I used when I was young. I think using beads, buttons, and bears to explain math concepts is very beneficial for students, and I think it's also a great way for them to just engage with the material. The Reggio Emilia approach. According to Dr. Reeder's presentation, Early Childhood Education Models Across the Globe, the Reggio Emilia approach views the child as the protagonist of their learning, and the teacher as a partner who observes, documents, and builds instruction around students' interest. This model emphasizes flexible learning spaces, project-based learning, and the environment as the third teacher. This means that the classroom should inspire exploration, communication, and creativity in students. I connected deeply with this approach because it values student voices. Growing up, learning often felt very structured and predetermined, but Reggio Emilia reminded me of how powerful it is when children's questions guide instruction. In my essay, I explained how a simple moment, such as students wondering why needles are all of a sudden out of stock, could become a meaningful Reggio-inspired project about supply and demand. This example reflects how I plan to apply the approach in my future classroom. By using students' natural curiosity as a starting point for inquiry and designing flexible spaces that support collaboration, as well as documenting learning to make student thinking visible. Although the full Reggio model can be very costly for school districts due to the materials and the training needed, I do plan to adapt some of its principles in ways that still honor children's interest. The Waldorf approach. According to Dr. Reeder's presentation, Early Childhood Education Models Across the Globe, the Waldorf approach, developed by Rudolf Steiner, focuses on educating the whole child, body, soul, and spirit through imaginative play, artistic expression, and predictable rhythms that help children feel grounded and secure. The Waldorf approach is organized into 3 developmental stages, with early childhood learning centered on imitation, sensory experiences, and imaginative play. Middle childhood emphasizes creativity and artistic exploration, and adolescence focuses on reasoning and critical thinking. What stood out to me most was the model's belief that imagination is not just a supplement to learning, but a primary pathway to understanding the world. Before learning about Waldorf, I often viewed arts and imaginative play as extras or fillers, but this model helped me recognize how deeply they support emotional development, creativity, and a sense of belonging. In my essay, I reflected on how this shifted my thinking about classroom routines, especially the use of music to support transitions, such as using a cleanup song to signal the end of an activity, which aligns with Waldorf's emphasis on rhythm and routine to create a calm, predictable learning environment. In my future classroom, I plan to incorporate Waldorf principles by integrating storytelling, music, natural materials, and imaginative play into daily instruction, which creates a warm and nurturing space where children feel safe to explore, express themselves, and develop holistically. Part and social play theory. According to Dr. Reeder's presentation on play theory and language development for bilingual children, Mildred's Pardon's social play theory outlines 6 stages of play. These stages include unoccupied, solitary, onlooker, parallel, associative, and cooperative. These stages describe and explain how children gradually develop the social, linguistic, and emotional skills needed to interact meaningfully with others. What struck me most about this theory is how clearly it shows that social development is a process, not an expectation that children should meet instantly. Each stage serves a purpose, and children need time, modeling, and supportive environments to move from playing alone to collaborating with peers. Reflecting on my own experiences, I realized that teachers often push group work before students were developmentally ready, which sometimes led to frustration or misunderstandings that could have easily been avoided had there been prior understanding or prior knowledge of these stages. In my essay, I describe a collaborative storytelling activity where students use picture cards to build a story together. This activity naturally supports cooperative play by encouraging turn-taking, negotiation, shared creativity, and communication among students. This example helped me see how intentional teachers must be when designing social experiences, especially for bilingual children who may be navigating language development alongside social development. In my future classroom, I plan to use similar partner and group tasks that honor where students are socially while gently guiding them towards the cooperative play stage. This would help them build confidence, empathy, and teamwork skills in developmentally appropriate ways that support both language and social growth. Story-based STEM. According to Zhu and Yang, design challenges present children with a real-world design problem to solve. This inspires them to think creatively and apply STEM-related principles or skills to develop a solution. This idea connects closely to an integrated STEM approach, which combines science, technology, engineering, and mathematics through authentic and meaningful learning experiences that encourage students to actively engage with concepts rather than simply memorize information. One example of this approach is story-based STEM, which uses children's literature to introduce STEM concepts in a way that is both engaging and developmentally appropriate for young learners. What stood out to me most about this method is how effectively it connects creativity, storytelling, and problem solving, which allows students to see STEM as something interactive and relevant to the real world rather than as isolated academic subjects. In my essay, I referenced the activity based on Iggy Peck, Architect by Andrea Betty, where students participated in a read aloud and then designed two bridges using different arrangements of geometric shapes. Students were encouraged to draw inspiration from these structures in the story, while also applying their own creativity and understanding of geometric concepts. This activity demonstrated how hands-on inquiry-based learning can strengthen student engagement while helping students apply mathematical concepts and ideas in meaningful ways. It also highlighted the importance of giving students opportunities to explore, experiment, and problem solve collaboratively rather than relying solely on direct instruction. In my future classroom, I plan to incorporate similar inquiry-based activities that encourage active participation, creativity, and critical thinking, which help students develop the problem-solving skills necessary to navigate the real world.